Hey guys, I'm going to work the textbook example of the 10.4.23, the one similar to that homework problem, the one about credit card minimum payments. And so before we can really do anything to figure out about how much interest you're going to be charged and all of that, first thing we need to do is figure out how much money got borrowed in the first place. So that's what I'm going to start with. It says a customer used his card to pay for the following expenses. So we've got his van repairs, his equipment, his office supplies, and his clients. So I'm going to figure out how much money did he even borrow in the first place. So if we add all of those numbers together, he borrowed $1,179. Now, question A, or part A, says, assume he had no new interest. In other words, he didn't have a balance on his card before he borrowed this money. Determine his minimum monthly payment on December 1st. So, as we all know, as long as you pay off the balance of your credit card, as long as you didn't have a balance before, as long as you pay off your credit card at the end of every month, they don't charge you interest. Okay, so there's no interest, assuming at the end, so he borrowed this on November the 15th. So it's saying that on December the 1st, how much is the credit card company going to require him to pay for his minimum payment? So what's the smallest amount they're going to ask him for? Of course, the card company doesn't ask you for the whole amount at the end of every month, because what they really want you to do, of course, is not pay it all off so they can charge you interest. So that's where they make the minimum payment. And it says here that the minimum payment that this particular company asked for is 1.5% of your balance. So in other words, they're going to ask you to pay back, or they're going to ask this guy to pay back 1.5% of the $1,179 that he borrowed when he gets a statement at the end of the month. So let's figure out how much that is exactly that they're going to ask him for. So in math, the word of is a code word for multiplication. I'm just going to bring that $1,179 down. Remember that to use the percent formula, you've got to convert this percent into a decimal. And the way you're going to do that is by moving the decimal over 2 places to the left. If I move it over 1 place, that moves the decimal over once, but I got to move it over a second time. And of course, because I don't have another digit there, I'm going to place a 0 in front. So we're actually going to multiply is 0.015 times $1,179. So the company at the end of the month, so if I multiply those together, it gets me kind of a wackadoo decimal. I don't remember what it was. Let me see. 0.0. So that gets me, well, not that crazy of a decimal. 17.685. Because we're talking about money, we would normally be rounding to the second decimal place. Well, and we still kind of are. And because the 5 next to it is 5 or bigger, that means that we're going to round it up. Normally, we would round it up to $17.69. However, the way credit card companies work when they calculate your minimum payment, they normally, like you'll notice, you very rarely get a credit card bill that's for, like the minimum payment is never cents. They always take that number and round it up. So even though the 17.685 rounds to 17.68, what the card company is actually going to ask you for as a minimum payment is they're just going to round it up to $18. So our answer to question A is that assuming that he's borrowed the money, he didn't have anything on his card up until this point, they're just going to ask him to pay back at the end of the month 1.5% of what he borrowed. So they're going to ask him for $18 on that minimum payment. Now, part B of the question says, assume that instead of paying off the minimum payment, which was only $18, he makes a payment of $100. So as you'll recall from the previous question, he actually spent $1,179. Now he paid off $100 of those dollars. And as long as you pay it off by the first month, the credit card company doesn't pay you any interest. So at this point, the day he paid his bill, he now owes the company $1,079 because he paid off $100 of what he borrowed. However, now that it's December the 1st and he didn't pay off the whole balance, now the company can start charging him interest. And that is going to factor in to the minimum payment because Part B is asking us, okay, on the next month, on January the 1st, what is the credit card company going to ask him for a minimum payment? The way that most credit cards operate, not all, but most, is that one of the things that factors into your minimum payment is the amount of interest that you accrued over the course of that month. So we need to figure out, so he paid off $100. This was his balance. This is what he still owes the company. And according to the prompt, it tells us the company charges 0.0485% per day. So we've got to use our simple interest formula. The amount of interest equals the principal. Remember, that's the amount that you borrowed in the first place times the rate. Oh, sorry, I don't know why I just did a equals. Times the amount of time that you borrowed it. So in this case, the principal, the amount that we borrowed, is $1,079. The rate, 0.04850. Okay, now what I just did here is make a very common mistake. Okay, this is not the correct rate. Because look at, now a lot of people think, ooh, well that's a decimal right there and I need to multiply a decimal. Well, this decimal is also a percent. You can see the percent sign right there. So I actually need to take this decimal number and convert it from a percent into a decimal. And you still do that the same way that you would if it were a whole number. So I've got to move the decimal 2 points to the left. So I move it over once, then I'm going to move it over twice. So there's a 0. I've also got another 0 that I need to put in there. So this actual decimal number is going to be 0.00044850. So I've got the initial 0 that was in the percent number up in the problem. Then I had to move the decimal over 2 more places to the left. So please be careful. Just because your percent has a decimal in it already doesn't mean you don't still have to move it 2 places to the left. So my principal is my 1,079. My rate is this decimal number. And then my amount of time is how many days, if we're going to make our payment on January the 1st. So we borrowed the money from the whole month of December. And there's 31 days in December. So we've got to multiply these 3 figures together. If I do so, I get 16.2227, 65. Again, because we're dealing with money, we usually round to the second decimal place because we got cents. Because the number next to it is smaller than 5, that means I'm just going to round it to 16.22. So the amount of interest that the credit card company is going to charge this guy for basically what he was doing is borrowing $1,000 for a month, and they charge him this daily interest rate of 0.04850%. So at the end of December, on January 1st, when he needs to make his payment, he owes them $16.22 in interest. So he's got to pay that interest. But remember that the company also asks him to pay 1.5% of what his outstanding principal was. So we're not just paying the $16.22 in interest. We also need to go back and figure out what is the 1.5% of what he owes. Because they, obviously, if you do nothing but pay off the interest in the credit card company's mind, then you're never going to pay off this money that you owe them to begin with, right? So they have you pay off the interest plus a little bit of this money at the same time. So if we know that we're paying $16.22 in interest, we also need to figure out what is that 1.5% of what he owes. So remember from earlier, so he initially borrowed $1,179, paid off $100, so now he owes that $1,079. So the bank or the credit card company is going to ask him to pay 1.5% of $1,079, which of course we're going to move that decimal over 2 places. That's 0.015 times 1,079, which means the bank is going to charge him $16.19 if I'm rounding that to the nearest dollar. Or I'm sorry, to the nearest cent. I don't know why I just said that. So this is the 1.5% plus the interest, which we established a second ago, is $16.22. So if we add those two together, that means that the company is going to ask for $32.41. And as we've already established, credit card companies don't like to say for minimum payments, we're going to do $32.41. Even though the correct way to round to the nearest whole dollar would be to round this to 32, the company is going to ask for $33. So the final minimum payment that the company is going to ask this customer for is $33.